am live. Oops. Checking the sound. Checking the sound. We have sound. Turn this around. Okay, that was quick today, y'all. Good morning. Welcome to my channel. My name is Natasha. I'm going to jump right into it today. I am reading through the Bible in a year in chronological order, and I am in the book of 1 Samuel. And today I'm going to read to you from 1 Samuel chapter 28, I believe. Let me find it. Yep. 1 Samuel chapter 28. We're at the end of the book of 1 Samuel. So this is the next passage. So I'll let you guys go ahead and check out the previous lives, okay? So that you could get some more background information on this. I am going to just be focusing on this passage today. So we're dealing with Saul and David. Is the end of the line for Saul. And we're going to see how he goes out. I titled this live, Desperate Situations Call for Desperate Measures, because we have this tendency to believe that a crisis situation, an emergency situation, might require us to bend the rules in some way, and that we're justified in doing that. It's a crisis. We didn't have a choice. There was nothing else we could do, okay? So we're going to see David in a desperate situation. I mean, not David. We're going to see Saul first in a desperate situation and how he applies this mentality. And then we're going to see David in a desperate situation. And we're going to see what David does. And I think through that, we can make a more righteous decision about whether or not desperate situations call for desperate measures. What do you do? What do you do when you're in a desperate situation and it seems like you're going to have to compromise in some way in order to get yourself or a loved one or whatever out of that situation? What are you going to do? Okay? And so let me read from 1 Samuel chapter 28. It says, "Now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for war to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, 'You assuredly know that you will go out with me to battle, you and your men.'" So after the most recent showdown that David has with Saul, where Saul puts together an army and comes against David to kill David because David's in hiding from Saul, because Saul has threatened his life on multiple occasions so that David can't live in Israel. He has to live in caves and strongholds and hills and hide out and have men around him to protect him because Saul is after him. So this last encounter that he has with Saul, David has the opportunity to kill Saul, but he has made up his mind that he's not going to kill Saul to become king, that he's going to let God deal with Saul, and that he's going to wait for God to deal with Saul, because he thinks of Saul as the Lord's anointing, and he doesn't, the Lord's anointed, okay? God anointed Saul to be king. If God doesn't want him to be king anymore, God needs to deal with that, okay? And so he proves himself to Saul over and over again that I'm really not a threat to you. I don't know who's telling you that I'm a threat to you or why you think I'm a threat to you. What have I done wrong? Okay, we read about that in 1 Samuel 26 and 27. That David has this, he's like, every time God has, this is the second time God has delivered you into my hand, and I didn't kill you, to prove that I have no intentions of killing you. Stop pursuing me to kill me. And Saul does seem like he's like, you're right, you're right. I've sinned. Come back, come home. I won't harm you. But David has the revelation that no matter what Saul is saying, he can't trust Saul. Okay? And that he can't return. Okay? And that surely Saul is going to kill him one day. And so he decides that he's going to leave Israel altogether and go and live with the Philistines. Okay? And so Achish is king of the Philistines. All right? And so think about it. I think he's king of Gath, where Goliath is from. That started this whole thing when he killed Goliath. Okay? Now David thinks the only place he's safe is with the Philistines because Saul fears the Philistines. And throughout his whole reign, he's been fighting against the Philistines, having some victories, but not able to fully rout out the Philistines. And so they're like a thorn in his side. And he's been trying to bring David down, but David has prevailed against him all along. And so now picture, Philistines are your biggest enemies. You haven't been able to defeat them. David is a thorn in your side. Now David goes and allies himself with the Philistines. So surely, according to human wisdom, David believes that this is the safest place for him to be so that Saul won't kill him. In 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 1, it says, "And David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me and despair of me to seek me any more in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand." Okay. And so David is living with the Philistines. So this is kind of like a desperate measure. Okay. And so now the Philistines do what they do, which is while David is living with the Philistines, he lives in a way that's blameless before them. He asked them for a town that he could live in with his men. So he's not living in the same city as the king. He lives in his own town. And it's far enough away that he's able to go on raids, and he raised the Amalekites and the Gershurites, and the Gerzites. That's 1 Samuel 27 and 8. And he gets, their livestock. And he leaves nobody alive, because these are part of the peoples of the Canaanites that God had told them to get rid of during their conquest of the promised land. But he leaves none of these people in these towns alive because he doesn't want the report to go back to Achish that he's doing this. And he uses this, I think, to support himself and his town and his men, okay, and their families, because it's a lot of them at this point. Okay. And so whenever the king questions him about where he's getting all this stuff, he claims that he's getting it by raiding the outskirts of Israelite towns. And so the king thinks, oh, David is on our side now because, he's made himself an enemy of his own people. They're never going to take him back now. So Achish fully trusts David. So when it's time for him to fight Israel again, to rally the Philistines against Israel again, he asks David to go and fight with him. He trusts David to fight against his own people because he thinks that David has burned that bridge. Okay? And for all intents and purposes, it seems like David is on board. Okay? So it says, so that's where we are in 1 Samuel 28. Now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for war to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, You assuredly know that you will go out with me to battle, you and your men. So David said to Achish, surely you know what your servant can do. You know how good I am at war and conquest, basically. And Achish said to David, therefore I will make you one of my chief guardians forever. And so this whole thing, like he's like, yes, I know what you can do. And if you succeed, I'm gonna give you a position of honor in my kingdom. I'm going to elevate you. And immediately my mind went to Jesus in the wilderness with Satan. Jesus knows that God has the kingdom laid out for him, and there's one way he's going to get there, through the cross. Satan's like, you don't have to go that way. God has given all the kingdom to me. Follow me, bow down to me, and I will give it to you. I have a shortcut for you. And it's like the same temptation is laid before David with this king. You know, he knows he's supposed to rule Israel, but Saul is in the way, and he's waiting for God to move. God hasn't moved. Here is the enemy, the king of Achish, saying, fight for me, and I will reward you. It must have been a temptation. Okay, but Jesus didn't take him up on that temptation. And let's see what David's going to do. Okay, so in verse 3, it says, now Samuel had died. So remember, the word of the Lord hadn't come much to Israel before Samuel. Samuel served Israel as a prophet faithfully from the time he was a boy. His mother gave him as a Nazarite to the priesthood, and he faithfully served God. And the Bible says that none of the prophecies that he made fell to the ground, meaning he was a very accurate prophet, and the people knew that they were hearing from God through him. Okay, and so now this man of God is gone. Okay, so this is a precarious situation for Saul. How is he going to inquire of the Lord? Okay, so it says, now Samuel, verse 3, had died, and all Israel had lamented for him and buried him in Ramah in his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the spiritists out of the land. So if you know the law of Moses, God says not to have anything to do with mediums and spiritists. Mediums, people that try to conduct a seance to reach the dead. Okay, God said absolutely not. In fact, you need to put these people to death. So it doesn't say he put all the mediums and spiritists to death. It says he put them out of Israel. So once again, Saul is doing the right thing, quotes, you know, not the way God told him to do it, his own way. It says he put them all out of Israel. Okay, so verse 4, then the Philistines gathered together and came and encamped at Shunem. So Saul gathered all Israel together, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets. So Samuel's dead. There's no prophet that is able to hear from the Lord and answer Saul. God is not talking to Saul. Urim and Purim were the two stones that the priest would use. They would ask God a yes or no question. One of them, you know, people have come to speculate that this is how it was used, because there's no specific thing here that explains how it was used, but a lot of commentaries say that it was like a yes or no. One stone was yes, the other stone was no. And so if they had a question like that, the priest would pray and ask God what they should do, and when they pulled out the stone, it would be either a yes or a no. So Saul tried all these things. Okay, God wasn't talking to him through dreams. He tried the Urim and Purim. He wouldn't hear from God. No prophet was telling him what he should do in this situation, if the Lord would fight for him. Okay, and so it says, then Saul said to his servants, find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. So wait a minute. So you tried to talk to God, and you believe God's not answering you. And so you're in a desperate situation. Desperate situations call for desperate measures. And so you're going to go and get you a medium. Okay? That you put all of them out of the land because you believe and know you're not supposed to be dealing with mediums and spiritists. But you're in this desperate situation. So you're going to use a desperate measure, even if it breaks a law that you instituted yourself. You're supposed to be, the righteous king over Israel. You made a law, get rid of all the spiritists and the mediums. You're going to break the law yourself because desperate situations call for desperate measures. What do you need a medium and a spiritist for? Let's see. So Saul disguised himself, so he knows he's doing the wrong thing because he knows he can't go to this medium as himself because he's the one that outlawed the mediums and the spiritists. Okay? And it's interesting to me that after he put them all out in the land, it's common knowledge where they can find one. So did he in fact really put them all out of the land? Okay? Verse 9. So Saul disguised himself. Okay, because when he said, find me a medium, a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her, it says, and his servant said to him, in fact, there is a woman who is a medium in Endor. Okay? Verse 8. So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes, and he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, please conduct a seance for me, and bring up for me the one I shall name to you. Verse 9. Then the woman said to him, look, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? So this woman is a medium, but she is upholding the law that Saul instituted by not doing the things that she can do as a medium. So she's in hiding, okay? And she's telling this man, I don't want to do this because it's against the law. And it's so ironic that she's talking to Saul and telling Saul what Saul should know for himself, the thing that should keep Saul from doing what he's doing. Okay? Saul is not bound by his law. He's not bound by his word. Okay? He's very unlike God, the God that he's supposed to be representing as king. Okay? And so the woman is afraid for her life. If I do this and Saul finds out about it, I'm going to get killed. Please don't make me do this. Okay? Verse 10. And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Saul, as the Lord lives, you're going to swear by the Lord. You're breaking the law of God. And you're going to promise not to kill her when the law of Moses says you're supposed to kill people that do stuff like this. But you're going to swear by God's name that you're not going to kill her and that you want her to do this thing that you've told people not to do. Because desperate situations call for desperate measures. So through this situation, we're seeing that Saul hasn't changed at all. The same problem he had back in the day when God told him to get rid of all those people. And you know what I'm saying? But he kept the king alive and let the people bring back the animals, under doing the good act of offering sacrifices to the Lord that he didn't ask them to do with those animals. You know what I'm saying? But he has this way of justifying disobedience and thinking that, well, I did most of it. I mostly obeyed. So God will be okay with that. Or thinking he could do the wrong thing and then pacify God later and still get God to work for him. And he's doing it again. So all this stuff that he's been through, all the ways that God has appealed to him by allowing him to still live and continue to be king, after losing the kingdom. the act of mercy that God gave him breath to live. All the time you're breathing, you can still repent. He just doesn't get it. He continues to fight God and to resist God. Okay, so let's go on. Verse 11. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? So she's assured. And he said, bring up Samuel for me. So wait a minute. So God isn't talking to you through dreams or through any prophets. So you thought to yourself, I still need to know what to do. So Samuel's dead, but there's a way for me to reach Samuel still. I'm going to use a medium to talk to Samuel. Okay. Verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. So in bringing up Samuel, we get what always happens when you deal with Samuel. If he's the voice of God, God's using his mouth. He's a messenger of God. Truth comes into the situation. So the minute she sees Samuel, she understands that she's dealing with Saul. He's in disguise. Saul, the king who outlawed the mediums, is sitting in this room right now. Why would he be having me do this except that he wants my life? So she's horrified. And she cries out, Saul, I told you I didn't want to do this. I'm trying to honor the law that Saul put in place. But you are Saul. Are you out here trying to deceive me, to kill me? So she's fearing for her life at this point. Okay. And verse 13, it says, and the king said to her, do not be afraid. Don't worry, it's not about you. I'm not after you. We got bigger fish to fry here. After all, desperate situations call for desperate measures. Okay? And so the king said to her, do not be afraid. What did you see? And the woman said to Saul, I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth. So he said to her, what is his form? What does he look like? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel. And he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down. Verse 15. Now Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? What are you doing, Saul? And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may reveal to me what I should do. So wait a minute. So God's not talking to you, and God's not answering you, and you told yourself, forget God. Samuel was wise. Samuel always led well. Samuel always had told me what to do. I'm going to go to Samuel, since God won't hear me and answer me. So Samuel's your God now? You're putting Samuel in the place of God now? And I can really relate to this, you guys, okay? Because I've been in situations where I needed something, in particular, I was seeking the Lord for healing for my body, concerning some different issues that I was struggling with. Nothing life-threatening, but annoying as heck and disturbing to my lifestyle as heck. And so I was pursuing God for healing. But to me, healing, if it comes from God, was hocus pocus, like instant, you're not sick anymore. Somebody lays hands on you, instantly you're not sick anymore. I do believe that does happen. that God moves in that way. I'm not saying that he doesn't. But in my mind, if it was from God, that's how it had to happen. Okay? And so I was seeking God for that kind of healing. And I felt like God wasn't giving it to me because I went on prayer lines and had people pray for me, and I prayed for myself, and I didn't see this instant disappearance of my symptoms. So I'd be looking at my symptoms. To me, they were still there. So that means God didn't answer me. God doesn't want to heal me. And so that was not the end of the matter for me, though. I believe God said, no, I'm not healing you. But in my mind, I was going to find some other way to be healed. Okay? So the mistake that I made was not to try these other things for my body to be healed. There's nothing wrong with pursuing a healthy diet. There's nothing wrong with pursuing a different lifestyle that, other people have experienced success with. There's nothing wrong with going to a doctor and having a procedure. Okay? But what the Lord dealt strongly with me, what was wrong with me, was that I really believed God didn't want to heal me. But I thought that I was going to go do something else and get my healing. So for me, no, you're not getting healed was not an acceptable answer. But I believed it was coming from God. But I thought that I was going to do my own thing and get healed. And God dealt really strongly with me on that. Okay? First of all, I was wrong to believe that God didn't want to heal me. I was wrong to believe that because the hocus pocus that I was looking for didn't happen, that meant God didn't want to heal me. That was a wrong belief. That was a lie that I believed. Okay? So I'm going to say that up front. Okay? But if that had been true, that God said no, God dealt with me strongly. Just like he's dealing with Saul right now. Oh, so you thought I said no, but you're going to go and get your yes some other kind of way? God dealt with me strongly that there is no other way. And the reason there's no other way is that God is the healer. Okay? So all actual true healing, okay? And when I talk about healing, I mean healing. You're healed. You're made healthy and whole. Okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that because your symptoms have disappeared that you're healed. Because I've also experienced that where my symptoms were gone, but I was still panicked, pursuing different methods to make sure it doesn't come back because I didn't really feel healed, even though my symptoms were gone. What is that? Your symptoms are gone, but you still don't feel healed. What is that? Because healing is from the Lord. True healing is from the Lord. Or you went to some kind of new agey situation, somebody laid hands on you, your symptoms went away temporarily, but later on they came back and it was worse. Was that healing from God? That's not true healing. You understand what I'm saying? True deliverance and true healing from God, no one can take that away from you. You understand what I'm saying? And it doesn't make you worse off than when you started. And so what God dealt strongly with me about was all healing is from me. So I sought God and I wanted hocus pocus. A better thing for me to pray would have been, Lord, you died for me. Your body was broken for me so that I could be healthy and whole, body, soul, and spirit. Easy for me to believe your blood took care of my sins and I'll be with you forever. Much harder for me to believe that when you died, you died for the whole person. You didn't only just die for my spiritual salvation. By your stripes, I'm healed spiritually and physically. You took your sicknesses on your body. You took my sicknesses on your body. I am, in fact, healed. So I don't have to ask you if you're willing to heal me. I believe you're willing to heal me. So these people lay hands on me and I still have these symptoms. I think what my better prayer should have been, instead of, okay, that didn't work, I'm going to try intermittent fasting. I'm going to try getting rid of all sugar from my diet. I'm going to try this exercise regimen. I'm going to not eat these foods. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to take these supplements, okay? Because Hocus Pocus didn't work. So I'm going to watch every video I can watch on how to make myself healthy and whole. I'm going to go visit this natural doctor, this natural path. I'm going to go to the chiropractor. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Nothing wrong with doing any of that stuff. But in my mind, God said no. So I'm going to have to use these other means to take my healing myself. This is the same mentality that Saul has. God said, no, I'm taking the kingdom from you. I'm going to do everything in my power to hold on to this kingdom that God has taken from me. And I'm going to kill David, who's threatening my throne. Because God has said he's giving my throne to David. So I'm going to kill him. I'm going to fight God because he said no, and I don't accept his no. God told me there's no way around me. I am your healer. And what's more, you're already healed. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Do you believe that you don't have to do all this stuff you're trying to do? And do you believe that if I did say no, and this is the end for you, do you believe that there's nothing you can do against me? Why are you against me? How can you be against me? How can you fight against me? Okay? And I am, the process was worked well for me because I did believe, I did receive, and I am walking out, my healing. And right now I'm healthy. There's nothing wrong with me from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. But anyway, if you're more interested in hearing about that healing journey that I took, I actually have a playlist on my channel that talks about healing. And my husband and I did a multiple service healing workshop recently, not too long ago, and those videos are up if you want to look more deeply into that. I'm not going to get into that right now, but for the purposes of this, Samuel goes on to say exactly what I just said. So Saul says to Samuel, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may reveal to me what I should do. So verse 16, then Samuel says, so why do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy? Saul, what in the world have I ever done to make you think that I'm out here doing my own thing? I've been devoted to the Lord my entire life. You know I speak the word of the Lord. You're saying God's not talking to you. So why are you calling me? The only thing I can do is give you the word of the Lord. That's what I am. That's what a prophet is. That's what a prophet does. What madness has made you separate me from God? That's Natasha translation. Okay? What madness has made you think that you're going to get around God by using me? That's sheer foolishness. That's sheer madness. Okay? And here we see that Saul is not thinking clearly. Okay? So let's continue. Verse 17, it says, "And the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day." So basically, he rose Samuel up from the dead so that he could hear the word of the Lord for his situation right now. And Samuel is over here telling him exactly what he told him before when God gave him the word of the Lord. Back in the day, when he didn't do what he was supposed to do with the Amalekites, Samuel told him, because you disobeyed God, God's taking the kingdom out of your hand. And so Saul, through this medium, during this seance, is right here telling him the same thing he heard before. Saul didn't learn anything new yet. But he's about to see that he got more than he bargained for. Okay? So Saul repeats it again. You've lost the kingdom. God has taken it away from you. It's your fault. It's not David's fault. It's not it's not the Philistines. You're not losing the kingdom because of the Philistines. Right now, you're grabbing onto God saying, the Philistines are trying to take the kingdom away from me. Save me, save me. It's not because of the Philistines that you're losing the kingdom. You're losing the kingdom because you don't listen. You do your own thing. You do that good idea. You're more concerned about what the people think and wanting to please the people than you are with wanting to please God and doing what he told you to do. Your job as king is to be God's arm for righteous judgment. And you didn't do that. God was passing judgment on the Amalekites and you didn't do what God told you to do. So God can't use you. Your disobedience is the issue, Saul. And you can't resist God. You can't fight God. The answer is no, and it's still no. And you're not going to use me to get around God. Okay? So, verse 18 says, "Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day." Verse 19, "Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." That was more than dude bargained for. He didn't want to know all that. Not only are you not getting out of this from, this battle victorious with the Philistines, you're going to take the beat down. Israel's going to take the beat down. But you and your sons are going to get killed in this battle, and it's going to happen tomorrow. Imagine how this is affecting Saul, because his experience with Samuel so far has been everything this man says comes to pass. Oh, no. You were terrified and you were seeking a medium so that you could, appease your fear, so that you could calm down your fear. And this is the news you get? Your desperate measure turned out to be a catastrophe. All right, let's continue. "And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines." So immediately Saul fell full length on the ground and was dreadfully afraid because of the words of Samuel. So now you started off this thing because you were really afraid. Now you're dreadfully afraid. You're more terrified than before you did this thing. You're worse off with your desperate measures than if what was the point of doing that? And Satan will always do that, y'all. He will always do that to you. He will put up a solution before you that seems like it's going to help, but it's making things worse. Because he doesn't have life for you. He doesn't have life for us. He wants death for us. He wants destruction for us. The enemy comes only to kill, steal, and to destroy. So when you follow him, you can't really bargain with him and come out on top. Okay? So let's read what else happens. So Saul was dreadfully afraid because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day and all night. So that's how he was so stressed by this whole situation, he wasn't eating. And so now the shock of it all, he has no strength left. And and he's passed out on the ground. So verse 21, and the woman said to Saul, then the woman came to Saul and saw that he was severely troubled, and said to him, look, your maidservant has obeyed your voice, and I have put my life in my hands and heeded the words which you spoke to me. Now therefore, please, heed also the voice of your maidservant, and let me set a piece of bread before you, and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. But he refused, saying, I will not eat. So his servants together with the woman urged him, and he heeded their voice. Then he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. Now the woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she hastened to kill it. And she took flour and kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it. So she brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they rose and went away that night. So she's like, please, I need you. Please get up out of here. I did what you said. She knows the word is terrible, and she sees the negative effect it had on him. So she does her best so he doesn't die in her hands, so that anybody can make her culpable for his death, and gets him up out of there. Okay? So now the story pauses, and we shift back to what's happening with David. Okay? So that was Saul. Desperate situations call for desperate measures. Now let's see the desperate situation that David finds himself in. Verse 29, chapter 29. Then the Philistines gathered together all their armies at Aphek, and the Israelites encamped by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed in review by hundreds and by thousands. But David and his men passed in review at the rear with Achish. Then the princes of the Philistines said, what are these Hebrews doing here? So Achish had brought David and his men to fight with him, because he's thinking, David's on our side now. The king of the Philistines is Achish. But the princes are like, why is he here? Isn't he an Israelite? Okay, so verse 3, and Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, is this not David, the servant of Saul the king, who has been with me these days or these years? And to this day, I have found no fault in him since he defected to me. You can trust him. Verse 4. But the princes of the Philistines were angry with him. So the princes of the Philistines said to him, make this fellow return, that he may go back to the place which you have appointed for him, and do not let him go down with us to battle, lest in battle he become our adversary. For with what could he reconcile himself to his master, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sang to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? They're like, wait a minute, we're going up against Saul. And yes, we heard that David was raiding the outskirts of Israel, and he's made himself, hated by his people as a traitor. But if there's any situation where he could get back on Saul's good side, is this situation. If he turns around in battle and double crosses us, that will be his way back in with Saul. We're not fighting with him. Okay, send him away. That's what the princes say. Verse 6, then Achish called David and said to him, surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright, and your going out and your coming in with me in the army is good in my sight. For this day I I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming to me. Nevertheless, the Lords do not favor you. Therefore, return now and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines. So the king goes to him and says, David, I trust you. I know you would do right by us, but my hands are tied. The princes don't want to fight with you. We can't go out in battle like this. You're going to have to go back. Okay? And so David said to Achish, but what have I done? And to this day, what have you found in your servant as long as I have been with you, that I might not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Well, there is the issue of you deceiving him and fight, seizing stuff from the Gershurites and etc. and lying and saying that you did it to Israel and that your heart is still loyal toward Israel. So maybe he shouldn't trust you, but he just doesn't know. So we don't know whether David would have really done it or not, but we see that the Lord makes a way for him to not have to fight against Israel and have any kind of, stain on his record that he allied himself with the Philistines against Israel when he does in fact become king, But let's see what happens to David, y'all. Verse 9, then Achish answered and said to David, I know that you are as good in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the princes of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to battle. Now therefore rise early in the morning with your master's servants who have come with you, and as soon as you are up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose early to depart in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Chapter 30. Now it happened when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag. Attacked Ziklag. This is where his family is and where his men's family is. So while they were out trying to go into battle with Achish, with the Philistines against Israel, the Amalekites attacked their town, okay? And it says they burned it with fire and had taken captive the women and those who were there from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but carried them away and went their way. So David and his men came to the city, and there it was burned with fire, and their wives, their sons, and their daughters had been taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. Desperate situation. Okay? And David's two wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, had been taken captive. So David's own wives, his own family has also been taken captive. Okay? Verse 6. Now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of all the people were grieved. So this ride or die army that has rolled with David, been loyal to David all along, they're so grieved by the fact that while he led them to join the Philistines, the enemy had come and burned down their town and taken their loved ones. So now they want to kill David because they're blaming him. And David has all the people against him now, just like Saul, who's always afraid of what the people are going to think. Well, but the people, I didn't want to rile up the people against me. Now David's in the same situation. His people are riled up against him. Desperate situations. He's in a desperate situation. Now let's see how God's chosen responds to this desperate situation. Is he going to take desperate measures? Is he going to twist things, break things, break laws, justify what he's doing his own way? Because after all, we're in a crisis. After all, we're in a desperate situation. After all, people might die. What's David going to do? Okay? So it says, verse 6. Now David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of the people was grieved, every man for his sons and daughters. It says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord. You're the Lord's anointed. You're the Lord's chosen. You are a son and daughter of God. The Lord goes with you like a mighty warrior. You ain't in no desperate situation. You are not in a desperate situation. Okay? It's a desperate situation for people that don't know the Lord. It's a desperate situation that don't have an all-knowing and all-powerful God going before them. You're not in a desperate situation. David did not consider himself to be in a desperate situation when he had lost everything, and even his men were against him. It says he strengthened himself in the Lord. Let's see how God responds to that. Verse 7. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, please bring the ephod here to me. And Abiathar brought the ephod to David. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? Wait a minute. Hold up. What do you mean? That's his prayer? Do I follow them? Do I go get my wife and my kids? And everybody else's wives and their kids? That's his prayer? You mean to tell me if God says no, you're not going to do it? You mean to tell me you're asking God's will about something that obviously in your flesh, it's not will I pursue them? It's like, God, help me pursue them. Isn't that what we would ordinarily pray? But we see David, a man after God's own heart. He will deny even himself to find out what God's will is in this situation. His question is, should I even pursue them? And implicit in that question is if you said no, if you say no, then it's no. I'm not trying to save my life. I'm not trying to save my life from these people, because if I wanted to save my life from these people, my prayer would be, God, be with me as I pursue them. I'm trying to figure out what your will is in this situation, because I know you're with me, mighty to save. You're my refuge. You're my rock. Okay? So let's read what happens. And then God answers him. And he answered him, saying, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So God said, yes, go after them. You're going to overtake them, and you're going to get every single thing back that the enemy took from you. You're going to recover all. That's the word David is going on. Ain't no desperate measures. This ain't no desperate situation. Almighty God is with me. I don't have to take no desperate measures. I will strengthen myself in the Lord. I will inquire of the Lord what it is that I must do. Even if it means losing everything, I will do whatever it is God tells me to do. But the merciful God that loves you, his answer is, go ahead, go after them. You're gonna overtake them, and you're gonna recover everything. Okay, so let's continue. So David went, he and his 600 men who were with him, and came to the brook Besar, where those stayed who were left behind. But David pursued, he and 400 men. For 200 stayed behind, who were so weary that they could not cross the brook Besar. So now his army is down to 400. Verse 11. Then they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David, and they gave him bread and he ate, and they let him drink water. And they gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. So when he had eaten, his strength came back to him, for he had eaten no bread nor drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? And he said, I am a young man from Egypt, a servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because 3 days ago I fell sick. We made an invasion of the southern part of the Cherethites in the territory which belongs to Judah and of the southern area of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. Oh, so so you were with the folk that done did this. So this is valuable intel. Verse 15, and David said to him, can you take me down to this troop? So he said, swear to me by God that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this troop. Verse 16, and when he had brought him down, there they were, spread out over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil which they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the hand of Judah. Then David attacked them from twilight until evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode up on camels and fled. Verse 18. So David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away. And David rescued his 2 wives, and nothing of theirs was lacking, either small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything which they had taken from them. David recovered all. And to me, this is the lesson that God has been trying to teach Saul his whole administration. The whole time he's reigning as king, God is trying to teach Saul this lesson. And Saul refuses to learn it. And he fights God. And he fights God. And he fights God. And he fights God. God said, this is what it's going to be. He says, no, this is what I want it to be. And he tries to resist God. And he fails and fails and fails. And he has no peace. No peace whatsoever. And he feels the kingdom slipping right through his fingers. And there's nothing he can do against it. So let's find out in chapter 31, the last chapter in 1 Samuel, what happens to Saul. It says, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua. Jonathan, who was ready to stand at David's side, but he's Saul's son. He's in Saul's house, and he's subject to Saul's folly. He ends up falling. Saul's hope falls. Okay? Verse 3, the battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Verse 4, then Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. So the very thing that David had said to, the guy that went down with him to scope out Saul when Saul came up against him, he said, no, let me kill him. Just let me put a spear through his head to the ground. God has delivered him into our hand this day. And David was like, he's not going to die by my hand. He'll be in battle someday and he'll die in battle, or God will slay him or something, but it ain't going to be me. And here Saul is dying in battle, just the same way David imagined he would. Apparently an arrow hit him, or arrows hit him, and he was mortally wounded, and he asked his armor bearer to end it. But the armor bearer, who's loyal to Saul, just can't see himself killing his king, even under these circumstances, because Saul's like, don't let them take me. Don't let them take me alive so that they can abuse me. You kill me and end it. And he wouldn't end it. Okay? And so let's see what Saul does. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. So he took a sword and just impaled himself on a sword and killed his own self. Okay? What a way to go, Saul. Gosh. Okay? Verse 5. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. So this armor bearer has understanding. He's like, oh man, You know, I'm not gonna live if they find me alive and he's dead. You know, that's the end of it for me, because his job is to protect the king. He's his armor bearer. You know what I'm saying? And so he falls on the sword and kills himself. Okay. And so it says, verse 6, so Saul, his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men died together that same day. So even after he dies, Samuel's prophecy is upheld. Okay? And so verse 7, and when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those who were on the other side of the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So it happened the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head. There's a cricket. Don't jump near me. Go. I'm over here. Y'all gotta see this. See that? This time of year. It's a cricket. Go. I don't have roaches, but I have crickets. All right, that was a distraction. I bind the devil. I'm not afraid of crickets really, but I just don't want it to jump at me. You will not jump at me. But anyway, let's get back on track. Right in the middle of this, y'all. Okay. So it happened the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. Y'all, what utter humiliation for Saul. Now he's a symbol of defeat. Now they're glorifying their idols because they were victorious against Saul. And all because he wouldn't humble himself and submit to God and be saved and be delivered. Even though he had David's example of what he should be doing the whole time, the whole way. He refused to do the wrong thing. I mean, Saul is absolutely without excuse before God. And it's tragic, y'all. It's tragic. Okay? So let's finish it. Verse 11. Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. They came to Jabesh and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. Wow. So now the Philistines beat Israel down, and they took a town that the Israelites were living in, because they abandoned ship. And Saul is dead, and a mockery is being made of God, and his body is on display. And they've had to bury the king and his 3 sons, who could have been the next king. And now Israel is vulnerable. And the most tragic thing about Saul is that his stubbornness and his rebellious didn't just only affect him. It's now affected Jonathan, who was a righteous man, but now he's dead. And it affected David, who had to be miserable for so many years because of Saul's paranoia. and Saul's refusal to submit himself to God. But at the end of the day, he lost. He was unsuccessful. He couldn't resist God. He proved that there was no other way around God. And God's word came to pass exactly. Wow. Wow, 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 y'all. Wow. Let me check this chat. I see Dewan Anderson says, I am humbled when David asked God for his will. If Saul had humbled his heart, his story would have been different. And you know what I'm saying? I agree with you, Dewan. The text doesn't say that, but it's implied all along. Because like I said, otherwise, what would be the purpose of him even living beyond that judgment that Samuel gave him back in the day when he was first ruling, that the kingdom has been taken from him? Except that the Lord was giving him an opportunity to repent, and he refused to take it. He refused to take it. Now, I don't know, I'm not saying that I think God would have given him back the kingdom and restored the kingdom to him, but it's possible, because there's a story in the one of the last kings of Israel, Manasseh. He was the absolute worst. He was the worst. Okay? He even had idols put in the temple, stuff torn out of the temple. He was sacrificing his kids to idols. He was horrible. You know, so God made his enemies rise up against him. He got taken up into captivity, but he repented. He genuinely repented. And God restored his kingdom to him. And in the New Testament, we have the example of the murderers that were crucified, one on either side of Jesus. And when the one murderer repented, Jesus said, you will be with me today in paradise. Okay? Which is proof that the path to salvation is through grace and it's through faith. You know, we are made righteous because of the blood of Jesus. It has nothing to do with our works. It has nothing to do with the good works that we're able to do. Okay? I've come to look at the good works as a testimony that I am his. It's a reflection that I am his. My good works don't make me his. Okay? And my lack of good works, you know, and okay, I don't want to phrase this the wrong way, because I do believe that if you are his, you're going to do good works, because that's what your nature is going to be, because that's what his nature is. You're not going to have somebody who's truly following God doing evil works. It doesn't line up. Okay? But we have the capacity to elevate the works to a place like somehow we're going to gain favor from God by doing good works, or somebody's going to be disqualified by their inability to do enough good works, or you know what I'm saying, like somehow, like how like we think of God like he's like a human king. He's like a human ruler. And he's not, because he has said your good works are just not enough. Your good works can't sanctify you and make you righteous and holy. It's just not enough. It's just not good enough. You know what I'm saying? The only thing that can make you righteous and holy is for you to receive that cleansing through the blood of Jesus. That's why Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. There's no other way to the Father. Okay, so for you to take some other religion or some other doctrine or some other path or some other way and think you're going to get around God's way and still get to God is utter foolishness. It's not going to work. It's not going to work any more than it worked for Saul to resist God the way he did. It didn't work. It's not going to work. And it's as simple as because God said so. Because God made it this way. Because this is the way it is. And no matter what we do to buck up against it, There is no other way. That's the gospel. That's the gospel, you guys. But it's such an easy way. Wouldn't you rather? Wouldn't you rather make it to God this way? And I think a lot of times it's a struggle, okay? Because pride is an issue. We want to say, look at what I've done. You know, we want to compare ourselves to other people and feel like we're better somehow. We want to be the favorite. You know what I'm saying? We want God to glorify us above somebody else. You know, to do it God's way, and for us to accept that God loves us all just as much. You know, he's poured so much love on us, but the love and the favor that he's poured on me is just as much as the love and the favor that he's poured on my brother or my sister, because he is love. And it has nothing to do with what I do. Okay? If I want to do something, have faith in God. If I want to do something, accept the blood that Jesus shed. Accept the fact that he took my place. That's what I can do. That's the only acceptable thing that I can do. Wow. Wow. Well, you guys, that's all I have for you guys today. I'm looking at the chat and I don't see anything more in the chat. So I pray that you guys have a blessed day and that this word was a blessing to you guys. And I will see you on the next live if God wills. Okay? But I hope you're cracking this word for yourself, that you're getting into it yourself, because Holy Spirit is always with you if you've welcomed him into your life. And his job is to teach you all these things and to reveal all these things to you. So be blessed. Don't get dizzy. I'm about to spin this.